Right. Good afternoon. I think we're still in the afternoon, not quite the evening. Good afternoon and welcome. I am going to be the moderator for today, and I am really happy to welcome you to Disco Network Presents Diaspora Wars and Going 50-50, Sowing Disunity in the Black Community Through Digital Propaganda. So I am Catherine Knight Steele. I am an associate professor and the director of the Black Communication and Technology Lab at the University of Maryland. The Black Communication and Technology Lab is one of the labs of the larger Disco Network. If you aren't familiar with the Disco Network, you should be, because it is the digital inquiry, speculation, collaboration, and optimism network. And our home hub is here at the University of Michigan. And we're very grateful to University of Michigan Digital Studies for hosting this and helping us with this event today. I'm going to go through a couple of preamble slides, and then I'm going to introduce you to our amazing panel today, and we'll get right into some questions and some hopefully really exciting conversation. So University of Michigan begins with their land acknowledgement, which is that this event is taking place on the ancestral, the traditional, and the contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. I'm sorry, I am mispronouncing that. Anishinaabe, the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi, as well as the Wyandot. And we live here and we learn here. We honor the indigenous people who continue to steward this land and those who are forcibly removed from it. I'm going to take a little moderator's privilege and add my own acknowledgement that I like to do at the start of any talk that we give, which is to be grateful for also the folks who make possible for us to be in this place where we think as a part of our career path. It is an honor and a privilege to do that. And we very often forget that on these campuses, those of us who are standing in front of people and giving lectures, our work is made possible by the folks who clean our spaces, who keep our spaces, who run our spaces, and who oftentimes we do not stand in solidarity with. So I encourage everyone who comes to events like this to remember as often as possible to stand in solidarity with the folks on your campus who make possible the eating, the cleaning, the keeping of the buildings, the security and the safety of our spaces so that we can do this work together. The accessibility statement from the University of Michigan reads as follows. The Disco Network and Digital Studies Institute is committed to accessibility and digital equity. As such, we invite audience members to experience this event in whatever ways bring you the most comfort. Cart captioning is available. Captions may be accessed via the Show Captions button for those who are joining on Zoom. If you experience any technical issues throughout the event on Zoom, please send a message using the chat and our staff will assist you. So the Digital Studies Institute here at the University of Michigan is a center for research and dialogue where faculty, students, and visitors focus on their inquiry and technology, digital culture, and social justice. Questions concerning the impacts of technology on race, disability, gender, sexuality, class, power, and identity are foregrounded in courses for undergraduate minors and graduate concentrations. They also host a pretty lovely summer institute and a diverse range of other public programs. I talked to you a little bit about the Disco Network. If you're not familiar with the work of the Disco Network, I highly encourage you to visit us on social media or via our website to learn more about our national network of researchers, artists, technologists, and policymakers that are envisioning a new anti-racist, anti-ableist digital future. Housed here within the Digital Studies Institute and working collectively to mentor and provide networking opportunities, publish open access research on the intersections of identity, technology, and host public programming like this to build the future that we hope to see. Thank you to the very many co-sponsors here, all of whom I will not be able to list, but we are grateful for your support and that we can move in the way that we do because of this very generous list of co-sponsors here from the University of Michigan. I'm just going to put on the screen a couple of upcoming events that are happening in collaboration with the Disco Network, things that if you're at this particular event, you might be interested in as well. Happening on January 29th, mark your calendar, is Black Boys and the Future of Technology. Our co-PI, Rayvon Fouché, is in conversation with Jonathan Cooper, Kareem Edward, and John Passmore. And then we have happening on March 10th, Against Surveillance and Spectacle, Building Global Resistance to Tech-Mediated Oppression, hosted by Remy Yergo, who's also a co-PI with the Disco Network, and a long array of other experts who will be speaking on that topic. All right, now I get to turn this over to introducing the folks that you came here to listen to, our wonderful panelists. First up, all the way on my left is Dr. Brooklyn Gibson, is an assistant professor of journalism and media studies at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Dr. Gibson is an interdisciplinary scholar whose areas of research include digital and social media environments, Black feminist digital technology studies, and the intersection of race, gender, social media, and power. Her current research takes an intersectional approach to analyzing how anti-Black discourses manifest themselves in everyday discursive exchanges within Black social media spaces. I'm going to introduce Jamil Lemieux, who is immediately to my left. Jamil Lemieux is a leading millennial feminist thinker, social influencer, and game-changing media maverick. A renowned cultural critic and writer with a focus on race, gender, and motherhood, Lemieux's written work has been featured in a host of print and digital platforms, including the LA Times, The Nation, Essence, Playboy, The Cut, The Guardian, Color Lines, The Washington Post, Wired, Self, Inverse, Refinery 21, The Columbia Journalism Review, The Nation, and Vanity Fair. She's penned the foreword for the 2015 anniversary of Michelle Wallace's Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, and the 2017 re-release of Ann Petty's Miss Muriel and Other Stories. And finally, we have A.E. Stevenson. A.E. Stevenson is an assistant professor of cinema and media studies at the University of Chicago. She is currently working on her book manuscript, where through an analysis of Vine, TikTok, and Instagram's The Shade Room and Blackfishing, she argues that Black women and girls have fundamentally changed the visual language of the internet. Dr. Stevenson has published in Feminist Media Histories and Catalyst. I'm going to hop down to here and hope that you all can still hear me. Maybe we can move our mics a little bit closer because it sounds like they kind of cut the volume a bit. Is that better? Oh, okay, awesome. So when they asked what kind of panel I wanted to do and what theme, I was, having the same conversations I noticed with students over and over. And also I was noticing that my feed has the same things that are happening probably on a lot of your Instagram or Threads or wherever you're spending your social media time happening over and over. And a lot of those conversations look the same as they did some years back. Some of them are about this idea of going 50-50. Who's seen this happen on their social media feeds? Yeah, okay. For those who aren't familiar with the titling of this, going 50-50 is about whether or not in heteronormative dating relationships, whether people should be splitting costs 50-50. And what does that mean about gender norms, roles, and expectations in romantic relationships? But that conversation could happen across a variety of social and economic backgrounds. My particular feed is pretty Black, and I see that conversation there a lot in Black social mediated spaces. But I also see a lot of conversations that would be in the category of what we call the diaspora wars. When I say the diaspora wars, how many folks know kind of what I'm talking? Okay. Couple folks are nodding. Okay, so again, we get into conversations, some of them very lighthearted, like who makes the best jollof? Okay, we can allow for a conversation about that, right? But there are other kinds of conversations about who gets to count in this experience of Blackness. What does that look like when we have conversations about reparations? What about jobs and positions and how we think about who gets to be a part of certain categories or groups that benefit from social programs? Or how we think of ourselves in relationship to unity or disunity as a people or as a racial group. Are there differences between ethnicity, nationality, and race? Actually, yes, there are. Those words have meaning. That's important, right? But the way that these nuanced conversations play out online is often not in a very nuanced way. And so a kind of pattern begins to emerge where we see fights and arguments brewing in socially mediated spaces, and we could brush those off as being inconsequential, or as I hope we do today, talk about where those conversations come from and what their larger significance is, both for the people who are participating in them and for what they mean for our larger social society, our political culture, things like voting and elections. All of these things begin to get intertwined. So from the early days of the blogosphere to the heights of Black Twitter, our scattered kind of content creation sites, we keep seeing these similar kind of conversations emerge. They often hover around heterosexual relationships and expectations on gender or essentialism around Blackness. What I'm asking our panel to start off with is, where do these conversations come from and how do we see these play out across platforms over time? So anyone who wants to jump in, just go ahead and give us a start.
Hi, I'm AE. I think the conversations have been happening with a kind of increasing frequency. Like I feel like they overlap, and especially because I spend more time these days on TikTok. So I feel like people are coming online and kind of sharing these personal stories. And then you have you know, I follow a number of people who I would qualify as misandrous, who are like, you know, their content is about uplifting these kind of conversations for the better or the worse to kind of prove a point about like why we need to move away from a kind of like patriarchal society. Um, but I think in many sense that the actual conversation within heteronormative spaces is literally itself reproductive. Like it is an extension of reproduction in a sense. So I think that like they are reproducing this kind of conversation, or people who are coming in who are maybe not necessarily wanting to change their minds about these certain things. Like they're just wanting to reproduce the ideals. And there are people who might have never thought about these things, never heard these new kind of concepts, or understanding why you in certain financial situations, you have to go 50-50. It's not really a conversation. And the conversation about going 50-50, like 90% of Americans can't really actually engage in. So it's like, it's all really many hypothetical, especially if you're thinking about the conversation of like 50-50 in particular, in conjunct with like the male loneliness epidemic, which isn't a real thing. And also, sorry guys, we can get into it. Or like the kind of uptick of like red pill and incel conversations where, you know, the kind of preoccupation with being a provider or like being a real man somehow all of a sudden skips over economic responsibility, which was the reason in the way of the power structure that men were able to hold over women for so long who couldn't get jobs past a certain salary point up until like the 70s when women could have credit cards or bank accounts. So I do think that there are, as you said, like many dynamics, but I think that they're meant to be replicated and bring people from either side back into a new medium, as opposed to have a new conversation and what's going on. We're like, why don't we all live in a commune? Why don't we live in like a neighborhood where we share resources? You know, that's never on the table.
I feel like this conversation also comes up a lot with my students as well. At Rutgers, I teach in the journalism and media studies department. I teach classes on social media and classes on media and popular culture. And I don't know, the attitude is trying to kind of change toward. I have a lot of students being really dismissive kind of these corners and spaces on the internet. But in the classes, a lot of times we break down where this is coming from, and just to pan out a little bit, I try to historicize everything that's happening on the internet for my students. Like none of these conversations are actually new. I know they feel new, especially if like you're on social media, but what social media is changing is like the scale and spreadability of very old conversations that are just gender essentialist and racial essentialist. Like they're literally age old conversations kind of warmed over. And so when I think about where they're coming from, I'm thinking about how they are related to a lot of things that you're saying, like economic and kind of like social anxiety. Like, you know, people are it, like if you grew up like most of us do in this, you know, where we all are under patriarchy, but you know what I mean? You grow up believing in it. You grow up feeling like things are owed to you just because you're male, or you have to perform a certain way because you're female. When things don't play out that way, you start to wonder why not. And so we're seeing a new era of people go on the internet for those answers, which is probably the worst place you can go. Because what you're getting is so many grifters who are giving you a language when we already have a language. We already have Black feminism that can break this all apart. We have like liberation theology. We have all these other filters and frameworks for how we could be talking about this, but instead we're going, well, you know, should we be going 50-50 on dates? You know, like, and that's very like much reducing the larger conversation. Like, do you really want to talk about going 50-50, or you want to talk about the changing role of heterosexual relationships and how you feel like as a man you should be doing X, Y, and Z, and you're quote unquote not able to do it, or as a woman you want the freedom to do this but you can't. Like it's just a deeper conversation.
I think, you know, these conversations oftentimes derive from people trying to figure out how to survive white supremacist, patriarchal capitalism the best they can, you know? So, like she said, they're the people that are there searching for answers, you know, and then they're the people that are there to drive discourse. And among those people, you have a lot of different intentions, right? Like you have people that, okay. You have people that want to drive discourse and inspire people to have higher level conversations and to better understand people or to better understand things themselves. And there are people that want to sow discord, that want us to be at odds with each other, that don't want, you know, Black people from across the diaspora to be unified. So you have to be very mindful consumers. And I think, we're all guilty of falling for some kind of rage bait or something that was posted online to evoke, a big reaction or annoyance from you. But, think about why somebody's looking for the type of reaction that, they want you to give.
As you see these conversations come up across these different platforms, right? So there's, I think, Brooklyn, you mentioned this. These are age-old conversations. We've been seeing them in lots of places. What are you noticing about the difference in the way the conversations are happening with our current social media landscape? Are there things we should be looking out for in terms of how these conversations are being recirculated now on sites like TikTok, for example, that wasn't happening 10 years ago on Twitter? Or are they fairly similar?
Did you have something to say? I was still thinking through my thought, but my big thing with all of these platforms is just because something is new to you doesn't mean that it's new. And so what stresses me out about all these spaces is that we're literally having exact word for word conversations we might have had 5 years ago or 25 years ago. I have I'm working on a book manuscript about this right now, and I have case studies of people who were peddling this type of rage bait, but it was in, daytime talk show television in the 1980s, and now they're back on YouTube. And younger generations don't know these people have already had their 15 minutes of fame. We've already debunked them, parodied them in our media, and it's interesting to see how the content is circulating unchecked. So I just keep thinking about the way that what is different about the social media moment is the silos. I've had, I don't know who hasn't had a person they know or a friend or something all of a sudden start saying some really crazy stuff. And it makes you go, where have you been on the internet? Because to say quote unquote crazy things, you have to have been sitting somewhere for quite a while in a kind of confirmation bias echo chamber where everybody's saying the same thing. And you start to really believe that everyone else feels that same exact way. And so what I'm seeing that's really different is just people getting caught in the comment section or caught in the little silos. But I'm gonna let you talk because you had another thought. I thought you did.
I was listening to you. I feel like I was thinking in line with your point about nothing is new. The actual conversations, I think all the time about the kind of conversation. If you guys go on YouTube, you should look it up. Between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni, may they both rest in peace. Where it's all the conversations we talk about today. You know what I mean? And even there's so many dynamics because James Baldwin is kind of replicating these kind of patriarchal standards, but he was a Black gay man. It's you literally don't have anything to do with this kind of conversation that you're putting forth in many ways. But I think as part of across these kind of apps, the kind of atmosphere of conversation is you'll have the same topics across apps now, which I feel in an earlier moment of this current social media moment, you wouldn't have conversations on Instagram. The conversations would be on Twitter. And then Facebook would have something else, and then Twitter or Instagram would have something else, Vine would have something else. So you could kind of get away from these kind of really just sometimes disturbing, annoying conversations. But it's if I don't want to talk about Huda from Love Island, there's nowhere I can't go. Unfortunately, there's nowhere I can't go. So it's
that's going to be on all of our feeds now because she said it in front of your phone.
Thank you.
It's on my feed. But you kind of can't escape these conversations. And so there's another conversation about the kind of economic thrust where you have at the actual app design level. Originally, apps had to be unique in order to survive within the atmosphere. And then all these bigger apps that took off start to eat each other. I don't know what Flickr is, but Instagram exists. You know what I'm saying? Instagram is one day just going to be meta. Facebook is going to be meta. They, in a sense, they're cannibalizing each other. And in order to do that, they take the features that made the apps themselves unique and generated new conversations. So say, for example, when Vine's looping feature got bought by Instagram, that changed the way that people did content creation on Instagram, where it was no longer a curation of images a la Flickr, and it became more a place where you can have conversations, a place where people are trying to create a career and get money, which drew people away from Vine. And so that means that the kind of like just funny, humorous, ha ha he he, like outrageous comedy that was on Vine, like now it has nowhere to exist. Even on TikTok, where ostensibly TikTok is supposed to be the inheritor of Vine, like it doesn't have, for the most part, that kind of carefree, humorous aspect to it.
Yeah.
We got the
Let's-
TikTok shop.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that because I feel like this is really about like a switch over between social media content and content creation. Like we've kind of made this transition fueled by influencers, but now picked up on by brands and by, as you said, these larger corporations that are cannibalizing the features and affordances of the platform. So in what ways have you seen like influencer culture kind of shift the nature of online dialogue? I mean, early social media wasn't built around influencer culture, right? When we're thinking about like the early blogosphere, the 2009 version of Twitter, et cetera. So I'm curious to really like, how do you see influencer culture kind of shifting the dialogue that's happening online?
Yeah, look, I think if we go back and look at earlier iterations of there are people we could identify as influencers, you know, particularly some of the bloggers. But like the big difference now is that influencer is considered a job, and it's a job that people expect to pay pretty well. Right. So that has a lot of impact over the content that's being created, you know, and as far as you know, important conversations about politics or social justice go, you basically have maybe two categories of influencers. You have people that are paid by institutions and organizations to create that content, which raises the question about their values and what do they believe? And are you just reading talking points or is this what you really stand for, right? And then you have, well, there's not just two categories of influencers. That's a little simplistic, but there's also the group of people that are being paid not to share their political values, right? People who maybe 10 years ago on the internet would have posted about who they were voting for, or how they feel about what's going on in Palestine, you know, but now because they have brand deals and perhaps their livelihood hinges upon, you know, their ability to be apolitical, right? Or to promote a particular political message that they've been, you know, paid to promote. Those are not the ideal folks to be leading, you know, our important conversations about certain issues.
Yeah, I was thinking like I was at a different talk at U Chicago like Tuesday, and one of the students asked me like, "What's the difference between influencer and a content creator?" And I actually feel like in many ways like it's kind of been an inversion where like anyone can be a content creator. That's not bad, guys. It's not bad. I don't mean that in a negative way. Anyone can be a content creator because like it's an aspirational career in a regard, but like at this point, even still past the moment of influencer, I don't know if maybe people disagree. I'm like, I think that there are influencers who don't have money. Like, I don't know. I think that like someone like Gabriette, who like is a model and now is married to Maddie Healy of the 1975, like she was an influencer for like a whole era of beauty, like 2-3 years before people knew who Gabriette was. Like now you have all these like Gabriette like offshoots, right? Or if you think about like, you know, in the inverse, like you have this kind of micro influencer, but you actually have something unique to offer in an aesthetic sense, or maybe a kind of style of presenting your content, versus someone like Jackie Ayana, who is like, that's makeup influence. If she doesn't agree like with you, whoever you have in the situation, like you got to drop that person now, right? So I wonder if like I'm curious if you see a kind of socio-political thrust behind who's an influencer, who's a content creator, and does that mean anything?
Have you ever heard the take that it's actually a gender difference? Like I was reading something, yeah, because they were talking this. I want to say it was from Taylor Lorenz, but like, just saying that like women were thought of as influencers, and it was like the mom influencers and all of that. And then once men wanted to enter the space, it was too feminized, and so people thought of influencers as trivial. So like, no, I'm a content creator, and so like I've heard that the difference is just semantic. But also, it is interesting to think about the different iterations of content creations and influencers through time, because the blog era is very different than what we're going through right now. So I don't know,
But I hear like a conversation about the shift, and I think bringing it to the conversation about the kind of dialogues that we're seeing online today. Julie, you said something about how, you know, things have to be profitable. Like what I'm influencing about, my influencing has to make me money, right? And so then I wonder if these are the conversations that are circulating among, whether we call them content creators or influencers, right? If these are the conversations that are circulating, there's something about these conversations then that is seemingly profitable, right? If we have sites like the Shade Room that are constantly reposting this, if we have content creators that are constantly posting memes and asking for our thoughts on them, knowing that they're kind of rage baity and are going to generate that, what is it then that is actually profitable about sowing this kind of discontent? What is it that it's profitable for not only individuals, but the brands they're associated with, the larger organizations, or even the corporations like Meta or ByteDance that own the companies that are hosting these conversations?
I don't know. I think that the conversations, depending on how they are, kind of thinking along the line of gendered kind of conversations, is like, I think of 50-50, going 50-50 as like part of this like try wife, soft life, like Black women deserve to have soft life aspect, where it's like, in order to be in a position to say, I don't go 50-50, you need to be aspirational enough to a type of person who has the money to support your lifestyle. And not just your lifestyle, but like a rich lifestyle where you don't work. And not only do you not work, you're spending more money than you could evenly match out. And so I think that like if you're telling people, okay, at the same time that the 50-50 going 50-50 conversation is happening, there's a conversation on who gets to be a real Pilates influencer, who has a real Pilates body. There's actually like a kind of buy-in where it's like, I need to literally look a certain way or need to engage in certain hobbies and or ways that cost money. That, you know, aside from like the actual generation of capital online that we don't see, that these companies like are trafficking in, it now has gotten to a point where everyone gets to eat except for us, right? So it's like corporations get to eat off of us being aspirational. It's like, yeah, I want to be going to Pilates 3 times a week. As a professor, I still can't afford that. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So I think that like a lot of people are buying in order to sell a life that would make them influencers and content creators on the hopes that it'll pay off. And in order for it to hopefully pay off, they have to believe in it, even if they don't realize that this kind of aesthetic lifestyle has a direct correlate to the political lifestyle. You know what I mean? In regard, like, you know, not to get Adorno about it all, but like there is a connection, you know?
For sure.
I think like it is really important when we're thinking about social media to follow the money. So it's like, who is profiting from this and how are they profiting? Like being a real influencer or a fake influencer, whatever you are, however we're calling it, it's like you're making these platforms money. They need people to share content on them, right? And we see like the current crisis. I don't know if it's a crisis, but Instagram is really panicking about how people do not post to their grid anymore. People don't post their content because there's been a turn against it, right? Like people are negative, like the way, like because of political polarization, because of the negative impact of influencers, because people are actually starting to think more critically about social media, a lot of people have divested from it and have a lot of negative things to say. And you see Instagram doing things like creating, I don't know if y'all have seen it, but they've created like AI profiles for you to follow of, you know, AI generated accounts that will post, and you can have a parasocial relationship with someone that doesn't exist, because it's not actually like these platforms are not about social connection. They've turned and they're all, I mean, they've always been about profit models, but now they can no longer sell us that vision that it's about us connecting with our friends. So they've had to create like a new product. And I actually think about this a lot because I think I think a lot of us have like kind of drank the Kool-Aid about social media and saying like, this is bringing us closer together. And it's like, it's literally doing the opposite. It's taking us out of physical spaces and community. It's pushing like essentialist ideology. It's driving political polarization. And instead of like divesting and reinvesting in our communities in like specific ways, we're just letting the companies create AI influencers to make up for that. Like, I don't know. So I think when we think about who profits, we have to think about how the attention economy runs. The attention economy is not new. This existed before social media, but they're harvesting our attention and making a lot of money on it, whether it's at the content creator, influencer level, or at the platform level. Like, we have to be a little bit more stingy with our attention.
It's great. I was having a conversation yesterday actually with one of my students, and I was like, I'm going to bring this up tomorrow. So shout out to her. She came to talk to me about a paper idea, which she was talking about the taxi cab theory. Has anyone else heard of this? Okay, I had not. I was like complete, and she was just talking me through, and I was like, at some point she's going to explain it. I'm going to know what this is. So she was mentioning the taxi cab theory at its core is the idea that this is again talking about heteronormative relationships and saying that like men, are going through life and they don't stop to like be with a woman until they're ready. So they can have a great relationship with a woman. If they're not ready to settle down, then they're going to keep going and they're not going to get in the taxi until they're ready to get in the taxi or the taxi light is off. I don't know how the taxi factors in exactly. But as she explained this taxi cab theory, I was like, people have been saying this. What do you mean? This isn't a new, she's like, this just happened this summer. And so this really sparked a thought for me about the algorithm, right? Because the algorithm of it all means that I was not exposed to this as like a new phenomenon. I think TikTok knows how old I am. And they were like, we're not going to give you the taxi cab theory. But this has been inundating her For You page over and over again. And so I wonder, especially bringing what we were just saying, and how you all think about the algorithm of it all, right? And how it is that, what impact algorithms have on keeping these conversations online and in rotation, and how that works for us. And if we can talk to folks who are on social media, using social media, how is that contributing to this kind of phenomenon that you're talking about? We need to remove our attention. How do we do that in an environment that is driven not by our own social connections? We're not maybe deciding who to follow, but our actions or perceptions about who we are is deciding what kind of content we're being exposed to.
Well, if you're like me, I can't, we should probably get off the internet, but I'm all over social media, so I'm not gonna be that hypocrite telling you to get off, and I'm right there. But I'm really serious about like what I consume online, because I know the algorithm is doing that thing where it's like feeding me whatever it thinks I'm going to be interested in. I know the logic of like, it's going to feed me what's going to make me mad, right? So I take a beat and I think about that. But I do think that like it's scary times out there, because like I can talk about algorithms all day to my grad students, to my undergrads, and then I still come against this attitude of like, well, the algorithm won't get me. Like everybody act like they're immune to the algorithm. Like I'm smarter than that. Or that person who believes that crazy thing out there, they're just not as smart as me. It's like, okay, well, y'all don't understand how these algorithms are working, because it's not feeding you one piece of content, two pieces of content. It's feeding it over and over and over again. And it also, like, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but we found this to be true. It knows when to push something to you. It knows when it can persuade you in moments of kind of like insecurity or sadness. There's a lot of I think in a few of the exposés that have come back out, they've talked about this in terms of how teenagers were getting content pushed toward them when they might be taking selfies. Or maybe they're not feeling good about how they look. Let me feed them this, let me feed them that, all to push consumerism. So if you think that's happening to kids, and we're also watching what happened with our elections and how people were getting fed ads in particular, you think that won't happen to you? It's not going to look obvious. It's going to be very, very, very subtle and very much over time. When you talk to some of these people who have fallen down these rabbit holes on social media, they've spent an incredible amount of time exposed to that content. And I always talk to my students about, the analogy of astroturfing, this idea that, content is boosted and it's made to look like real people. It could be sock puppet accounts, like fake accounts or whatever, but the algorithm is pushing it to make it seem like it's more of an important or popular topic than it is. My students come and tell me about something crazy every other week, and I'm like, y'all, I'm on old people TikTok. We don't get that type of stuff. But it's hitting you because you're younger, you're more susceptible, and you don't have anything to counter it with. If you're not rooted in like a strong political education, if you're not reading, like you are the most susceptible. And so it's hard to
the
tell.
folks, I want to say that I wouldn't say, my mom would beg to differ in terms of who's susceptible.
Maybe I shouldn't say most. I was thinking about a specific type of content
Yeah,
playing
for
with your
sure.
confidence.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But every demographic is susceptible in a different way.
something.
And I
Yeah,
think that
for
what I'm
sure.
really speaking against is this idea that, oh, if I'm smart, I won't be taken in.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
oh, that's not how this works. Like, because artificial algorithmic amplification is something that is extremely convincing to get you to think that everyone thinks the same way, and everyone's thinking about this thing, and this is important, and this is new, and this hasn't happened before.
Right.
And it's really just an it's a logic coming from these companies trying to push engagement.
Yeah.
Like every single social media platform, the people who design the user interface, a lot of them have taken the same game theory class at Stanford University. And so they're designing these platforms to keep you on them, to keep you clicking, liking, everything down to the colors, the shapes, the push notifications is like designed after the same people who are designing casinos. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially, going with the conversation of the name of our conversation is like the algorithm it knows we're saying like attention, it works. Like it's like, I don't necessarily. Okay, my algorithm knows that I'm single because the first thing I see when I open TikTok is like, is having a boyfriend embarrassing? And it's like, this conversation on Vogue, I'm like, baby, I read this hetero-pessimism article in the Jacobin in 2016. This isn't even a new conversation within my own mind. Like, I'm aware of it. And it's like at this current moment where it's in middle of cuffing season, like it's not working for you, then you're like, okay, well, I don't even want a boyfriend anyway. It's kind of like, well, it's like the conversation is not even actually important in any sort of regard, because it's like, why am I'm seeing all these things about the Vogue article and people responding, people agreeing, and in between I'm seeing like, oh yeah, by the way, all your flights might just fall out of the air tomorrow. And it's like, like what actually am I supposed to be paying attention to, right? That's actually important. That should be part of the algorithm, right? Or like even similar, like I like to be aware, like I am aware of the algorithm. So I'm like, why am I all of a sudden getting interior design? Like what is that? What are they trying to tell me to do? What I need to do? Are they looking at my house from some sort of secret camera or something like this?
Or the cameras that we install,
Well, I don't have I don't have any of those. But like, or people are mad at me and all my friends are mad at me who are watching who I don't have my like location on. I'm like, I don't care. You need to know where I am. Like the government already does. I'm like, I don't care. But I think that like this kind of algorithmic focus is like, I don't know. I think there are people who are thinking about like posting on Instagram. I think now because people know it's like out of vogue, like people are just doing it now with the kind of freedom that like we had in like 2012, where you would have a blurry photo of like your thumb and you would post like hee hee ha ha, like that was the caption, right? So I kind of feel like as algorithms are like increasingly more focused on like what can we do to get people more to pay more attention to us, I think people and maybe younger people, like I see like articles that like kids they have only flip phones. So, maybe there will be some sort of nexus point of like people being like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want online. Similar to how we were doing our little interviews for this conversation. They're like, how can we find you online? I'm like, don't find me online. Like I don't want to be there. It's like maybe it's a similar kind of thing that will happen where people are kind of just like, okay, we have to all like kind of in some way divest from believing that this is the only sort of entertainment that we can have and only using it as maybe just like a like a timestamp type thing.
So I've heard a lot of talk about like the algorithm does, the algorithm's doing this. So can we talk about what that means? Who is this algorithm? And like what can we talk about ownership, I guess is the question. Brooklyn, you brought up a bit about designers and folks who are embedding certain kind of things into platforms. I would be remiss not to ask about ownership to folks who studied under Dr. Sophia Noble and thinking about algorithms of oppression. So what does ownership matter in promoting and producing Black digital content online? Can we avoid some of these issues by looking in Black-owned spaces? Are there Black-owned spaces online? And what does it mean to have a Black-owned digital space? And whether we would avoid these conversations in that space if we just shifted our ownership, which is a model that a lot of folks have suggested over the years.
Unfortunately, Black owned simply means that it is owned by Black people. It does not tell you what the character of the people who own that company is going to be, what their values are going to be, if they're interested in informing Black people, if they're interested in, simply selling products to Black people, which is what a substantial amount of the few Black digital media platforms that still exist are in the business of doing, selling things to Black people, getting as many Black eyes in front of advertisements. There's the app Spill that's Black owned. I know they're not doing an advertiser model at this point. But aside from that, I don't know of any Black digital spaces that are meeting the moment.
Yeah.
Meaning if they are a news outlet, they're
Mhm.
delivering substantive, regularly updated news. If they are doing lifestyle content, that they're doing quality, meaningful, useful lifestyle content. Yeah, it's bleak. It's bleak.
It is.
Like the shade room is Black owned. Like I could just stop the statement there. And not only like people are like, oh, maybe Black owned, but it's like she's a Black woman. Like her name is Angelica Nwandu, and like a lot of people don't know that like she started it because she got money from the Sundance screenwriting program, and she wasn't getting enough money back from making a movie, and so she used that money and turned around and started the shade room and made it back in a week, right? And this is like kind of before algorithm, I don't even like maybe at the top of like algorithm driven kind of behaviors on Instagram where she's kind of starting this. It was like right around there. And so in many ways, like even if it's Black owned, kind of like what you're saying, like the money revenue logics is the same. Like we
Yeah.
need attention, good or bad. And most of the
Right.
time it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
Like, okay, hot take, guys. Like Chris Brown wouldn't have a career for the Shade Room. I really believe that. Like, if they weren't posting about him as if what he does matters or is like not that bad, then I think that like there would be like a lot less conversation about him in the Black community. I'm like, I don't hear any Chris Brown songs myself. Poisoning. I mean, I worked on that, right? And so like I think that there's a way that like there are certain Black owned spaces like who are because they are invested in Blackness, but they're not invested in like protecting Blackness even within from ourselves. And like since like, we're still humans, like we still have like this kind of mal-driven, sort of like pleasure-driven that at other people's expense behaviors, that it kind of all ends up in the same place. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think in many regards, like even certain like just in community Black spaces aren't necessarily the best places to be. You
Yeah,
know?
we have to really think about. Oh, go ahead.
Do you think it's possible though?
That's what I was gonna ask. Is it possible to have a profitable? Because I think that's really the question.
Question,
Should you
'cause
have
the
a
money is
profitable?
the-
Yeah.
Money. And yeah, that's the part that I did mention. Like the advertisers are so racist. So Black publications are so severely limited in their ability to be truth tellers
Yeah.
and to do honest work. If you're talking about sex, if you're talking about HIV, if you're talking about drug use, these things are by a lot of advertiser standards considered to be too hot for TV. And these same advertisers will go to Vanity Fair or, Maxim or GQ and, they can talk about sex and drugs and all the things, and maybe even have lower circulation numbers than some of those Black publications, like Ebony and Essence once had, but they're still not able to have autonomy over the type of content that they're able to create. And we haven't, there's yet to be like a subscriber model
Right.
that works,
Yeah.
for media content, for the, for Black media content in that way, right? It's like even, magazines for years have been making their money from activations, events, and advertisers, not from you spending $12 a year for, 12 issues. So it's like, even if somebody were to say, hey, I'm creating this platform and all you have to do is pay a monthly fee to use it, that wouldn't be enough to really create anything of any substance unless people were paying a lot of money per month.
So we've been talking about kind of corporate driven advertiser based models. It's going to sound like a shift, but I hope you're going to tell us why it's actually not that big of a shift. I know, Dr. Gibson, you have a piece coming out soon on digital authoritarianism. And I was hoping you could maybe explain that to us and what that is, how Black social media users often can participate, sometimes unwittingly, or how images and the idea of Blackness can be co-opted in that model.
Yeah, it's out now. I think it's already published, open access and
Open
digital
access.
dialogues. Digital dialogues.
Shout out to Dialogues on Digital Society.
There we go.
Here it is.
Thank you. Dialogues on Digital Society. When we think about digital authoritarianism, we have to think about the ways that the government and powerful entities are controlling us using technological tools. And this can look like a lot of things. This can look like excessive data collection and how kind of a lot of our electronics are extracting data about us and are helping to inform some of these algorithmic models. Or we can think about social credit systems and just all the different ways that technology can be deployed to do that. But we can also think in the social media space about ideology and how ideologies can be seeded in social media spaces. And that to me is the stuff that keeps me up at night and is a part of my research, because it's really easy. Okay, let me not say easy, but historically, propaganda is very easy to seed in a society. And we are watching it right now. We've watched it before. And so I think about all the ways in which these conversations that happen on social media are tracked onto larger political conversations that we don't think of as political. Like we leave the 50-50 conversation at the level of well, this is the way it's always been, and this is traditional. And it's like, oh no, these are conversations about economic and social anxieties, conversations about gender norms, or like historically tracked onto political movements. So this is not just a conversation that you're having with your friends about whether or not Red Lobster or ice cream day is appropriate. This is like this is trying to get you to think about your like appealing to your identity in ways that will get you riled up, right? That's how people are watching ads during the Super Bowl about trans people in bathrooms and they're getting angry. It's because they were already in this other conversation that felt unrelated and they're like, oh my God, all of society is changing. I must do something now. This is how everyone is so angry, because these conversations are being seeded. So we have to go backwards. I literally just had a conversation with my social media master students. I was like, do you know anything about these people that own these tech companies and what their politics are? Yeah, they're billionaires, but like, do you know anything else? And like, when I was talking about how like Elon Musk and all these people are pro-natalists, my students were like, what's a pro-natalist? I'm like, you should know what that means, because they want you to be a pro-natalist too, which is why these conversations are not stopping. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like these companies could do something to like slow down political polarization and all of these conversations. They don't want to. It's not only profitable, but it serves their larger agenda of getting us to further dehumanize one another, not engage with empathy. I don't know if y'all have noticed that trend too. A lot of these arguments are about us not seeing each other's humanity and like literally treating each other like transactional relationships and things like that. So I think people can take digital authoritarianism in a lot of different ways, but I'm really thinking about the ways that we are being targeted, not just by mis and disinformation, but by coercive, persuasive, harmful ideologies that are meant to change our politics to align with the power structure.
Yeah. I know one way that you mentioned earlier, I think today in conversation, was about the recently AI generated Black TikTok users. Could you tell us a little bit about that example, just so people can get like a kind of a tangible example of what that looks like in real time, that crossover between, oh, this is just silly stuff happening online, to like real policy changes and things we're seeing?
You know, it's so funny because one question I always get too is like, how do you, because I look at like misogynoir online, like networked misogynoir. And like one of the best examples of recent times is like these AI generated images of Black women crashing out about EBT. Have you guys seen that? And I'm not gonna lie to y'all, I really didn't actually I didn't press play on any of this stuff. I just kind of saw it and I saw other influencers talk, not influencers, but like people online kind of like talking about it. And I was like, this is the thing. Like this has existed before in different iterations, but now we have tools that kind of blur the line between what is just in your sick imagination that you're reproducing and what you're trying to pass off as truthful and very real. Like we've reached that moment now, right? And so it's terrifying to me because I've been trying to think through like, what are they doing? Like with like trying to push us into this like AI area. AI is the future. It's going to be great. And then you're just using it to push racist, sexist ideology. You're pushing it just to mess with our sense of reality. This stuff doesn't exist in real life, so now you're creating it. Like that terrifies me. And we have so many different examples of that. I think the AI the EBT crash out things is probably primarily focused on white racists, perhaps. But I know that like by seeding these gender essentialist and racial essentialist like tropes within the Black community, there are going to be people within our community who are like, yeah, all those Black women and just living, you know, like reproducing those anti-Black sexist kind of stereotypes. And it's just so much more powerful than previous media technologies. It's existed. We know what the welfare queen is. We know that anti-Black racism exists primarily because of the way it has been pushed through media communication technology, whether that was a vaudeville play or a racist film or a television show. But it's somehow we're not connecting the dots with the social media moment because we just think, oh, this is so new and it's so different. It's like, no, we've been here before. And you need to protect yourself because this stuff is really persuasive.
Yeah. And sometimes it's very obvious, right? Like, so, I mean, it's not obvious that these are not real people, but the trope is obvious. And then other times I feel like it's a lot more subtle. I saw a circulation of a meme. I don't know if other folks saw this circulating as well. And it was just, first one I saw was just one person's face. And it was, I was on drugs for 10 years and I just got off. And it was because of
I
this.
saw that one.
And then there was a whole thread of people, like 30 more pictures. They just superimposed this quote onto like 30 different Black women's faces. They just grab profile pictures or create an AI images, and it's just the same thing. And that's a much less subtle, I mean, it's a more subtle way of getting at the same thing. And so I'm wondering, as we think about the perpetuation of these stereotypes, are there ways we combat that through long form writing, through thinking about people having the ability to tell their own stories? I'm thinking about your work, Jamila. I know you have a forthcoming book coming out. Black Single Mother. You describe it as an examination and tribute to Black single motherhood, and writing and thinking in that kind of a space where you get the opportunity to do long form writing, to talk to people about their stories, to have folks, give longer than 10 seconds to a narrative. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you've witnessed doing that kind of work, that kind of writing, that kind of editing work, and also how things like books and memoirs and personal stories can work in opposite directions to kind of this AI-driven, some of the slop that we see online?
Yeah, I think long form is more important than ever. Like I felt like I needed to create something substantial about Black single mothers. It was not enough to do short form content or just to publish an article and hope it goes viral. There's so much that needs to be said, and so much of it can be taken out of context when you're only experiencing it in 30-second bursts, right? And I'm nervous because the book is literally called Black Single Mothers. So I know what's a 30-second reaction to just simply that, can be, and just how hostile the online landscape has been for Black single motherhood. So, parts of this book are in direct response to what has been, put forward digitally about Black single moms, or how, like, the internet gave the powers that be unfettered access to spread these myths and these hateful ideas that have always existed. So the welfare queen isn't new. The Moyer Pam report isn't new, right? But we have this brand new ability to indoctrinate everybody into this way of thinking, and these really, like you said, these subtle, these videos that can appeal to, oh, I'm just a reasonable people, I don't think it's wrong for people to have food stamps, but do you really need lobster? So yeah, I'm hoping that I can drive people, because my audience has been primarily digital throughout my career. This is, a little bit of a gamble. So we'll see. Are people willing? It's 380 pages long, so it's not a short book. But I'm hoping that people are willing to engage with something long form.
I'll be reading it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to ask also, I mean, on that vein of thinking about, I think a lot of our conversation today has been about Black women online, rightly, like all of our careers, I think, are focused in that way. Dr. Stevenson, you write a lot about the digital skill sets of Black women and girls and how that creates possibilities to push back against things like digital authoritarianism, like these tropes that we see online, these vitriolic discourse. I'm wondering what it is that Black women and girls uniquely bring to digital discourse in your research. How do you see how Black feminism can support new approaches to tackling some of these challenges we talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of my original approach to talking about Black women and girls came from a desire to kind of understand the shade room, actually, surprisingly, like Vine in the shade room, like what was so important about Vine. So like one of the things I focused on is the creation of the word fleek by Kayla Newman, and how she like didn't get any money from that really. And like while like no one uses fleek right now in common parlance, like I give it about 3 more years, it'll be back. And I think that like part of like, what is so undeniable about what Black women and girls experience is, even if they don't know the theory, even if they don't believe the theory, like a lot of Black women I talk to are like, I'm not a feminist, but, and I'm like, you just said the most groundbreaking feminist theory I've ever heard in my entire life. They'll be against these words because of these kind of algorithmic things that tell you you should be against it, or Black feminism actually ruined the Black community, which is 100% undeniably CIA-backed propaganda, by the way. Is that we experience the actual impacts of the theoretical political sphere. And so, and since we experience it, like it's kind of undeniable, and it comes out in how we move through life. And one of the ways that I feel like, I'm not necessarily someone who is like a proponent of like, and not against people who do, but I don't necessarily focus on like joy per se, but I am so intrigued by like the measure of play, and how like playing for Black girls just online, or Black women online playing around, is sometimes the only space where in which like we can only play like this, like only we can make this joke and this connection, and it like becomes viral, right? I think about Casey Winbush on TikTok. And I don't know if any of y'all know who Casey Winbush is, but like I think she's actually a genius. And I think that other people are replicating the way that she does kind of like object focused comedy sketches. Like she has one where she finds out, when she's like plays as if she's Raggedy Ann, learning that people call her Raggedy Ann.
Okay.
And I'm like, this is such a galaxy brained concept. She's like, Raggedy who? Raggedy who? And as in me, like, I feel like there's a certain level of like measure of play. And similarly, like something like the Savage Dance that people were doing in like lockdown, like was created by Julia Harmon, who like has a blue check on TikTok, but every time she posts like her videos now, it only has like 10,000 views. Meanwhile, Addison Rae has an international pop career and was selling herself as the CEO of the Savage Dance when she stole it from this Black girl. Do not listen to Addison Rae. Do not listen to Addison Rae.
Public
Do not
service
listen to
announcement.
Addison Rae.
Yeah.
Just listen to Charlie XCX. Renegade, sorry, Renegade.
Renegade.
I'm Charlie XCX.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Okay. But anywho, I feel like there's a certain sense of like, we actually live at the intersections of intersectionality. And so what we are focused on, are interested in, even the perspectives that we might have, whether they're good or bad, outlines these things in many ways that I find really fascinating, even if, I disagree with what people are saying. Like most of the time, I'm loving how they're saying it, unfortunately. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just tracking that kind of move over time, of thinking of this tension we have to hold, I think that many of us hold, for hoping that people get paid for their work, hoping that people get paid for their labor, but also creating space for everything to not be labor, right? And I think what you're talking about in terms of play really speaks to me in terms of thinking about and imagining digital futures beyond, imagining futures beyond where we are right now, where the digital and hypercapitalism are so linked together. So is it possible for us to recreate spaces of play toward notions of joy as a liberatory practice that aren't actually tied to our labor, right? So when people ask us, like, what do we do online? How do we making money? A creator or influencer economy is based on the idea that everything we do online should be profitable, right? And so undoing these logics, these like capitalist logics that have like really secured a notion that everything I post, I need the most eyes on, I need the most people to watch, is really about undoing some of that and migrating back to spaces of sociality, of play, of community, things that maybe our algorithm-driven social media content creator world doesn't allow for in the ways that we wish that it would. Well, I'm really happy to have been able to have this conversation with y'all. I think it's time now for us to maybe open it up. I've been terrible at the clicker, y'all. I'm always terrible at the clicker. But we do have time now to field some questions from our audience, both in person and for those who are on Zoom. So if you're on Zoom, please go ahead and post your questions there. We'll have someone in-house who will be able to read those out loud. But if you're here, just go ahead and raise your hand. We do have a microphone in the back, and someone will bring it to you so that you can ask your questions.
Thanks. Thank you. Very, very glad to be receiving y'all's words and wisdom. I came a little late, so I don't know if y'all already talked about this, but I think Drewski is a genius in one regard, but I also feel like he might be doing something a little sinister on the other side. So curious to know what thoughts y'all might have.
I should think about Drewski quite a lot. Sorry, I should do. Because the whiteface, that was one of the most shocking things I've seen online in like 5 years. I thought that was an actual white man. And then the next day, a white man who looked just like that was like, I thought that was me. I was like, and I was like, I thought that was you too, bro. No, I mean, in the sense that I think that what I found, like, I think that he was pushing the bounds, kind of like in a very Wayne's brother way. When he did the white frat bro skit in situation, I was at institute, like he was actually on frat grounds. I was like, this is getting closer to an experimental. But I think that like in many ways, like Drewski, what I find what he's doing is he is in his body has a like genealogy of Black humor that kind of can't be replicated. And because he has a specific sort of like situational, like kind of performative comedy sketch history that he's doing online, like, of course, plenty of people want to do, who was the other guy? Oh my God, Ray Ray, like, oh, he was the other guy who used to do, I thought he was going to be as big as Drewski, but he kind of was like falling off. That I think that like Drewski is aware that like there are certain things that he can do that's just funnier because of his body type also. Like there's actually things about him that other people can't replicate because of how he looks. But I think that and the things that he's doing poorly is that he replicates the conversations that we have online into more humorous aspects, which makes it unimportant. Like he'll do a sketch about 50-50, or he'll do sketches about the bro who like gets too drunk and freaks the girls out. I'm like, you mean your homeboy who's predatory? That's not funny. Like, and
He just did a Mino Black. I
Dominican, like,
Yeah.
that's a conversation worth having that you now further make
Laughing at
comical,
it,
right? Further making people who are Dominican, who don't necessarily identify as Black, who maybe should identify as Black, feel like they don't want to. They don't feel like they're not taken seriously, right? So I think that there is a way of humor that's supposed to make you question what you take for granted, and then there's a way that in order to be viral, like you kind of actually can't do that kind of humor. Like George Carlin would have never been John Carlin, I think he's passed away, would never be viral online. Oh,
Mike?
he'd never be viral. Oh,
I think
George
the
Carlin.
challenge maybe that's happening is about like virality requires like in this moment right now this shortness, right, this and it's really tough to do nuance in short pieces, right? So the amount of time that people are spending, let's say with a TikTok video, is actually less than even the length of the TikTok video can be, right? People are deciding in the first 3 or 4 less than 10 seconds whether they're staying with it. So it's not about like whether the quality is there to go viral, right? Like, so we're thinking about affordances of platforms. On what platform can folks who joke takes 20 minutes to hit, right? Like when we're thinking about the old records that maybe our parents used to listen to, like comedy albums, it takes sometimes 7 to 10 minutes to like build a joke, right? To build the setting of the joke and to get there and to build the characters that are into it. And so there's this thing we have to weigh between, I think, what you're talking about, which is how quickly can I get to the funny? And how quickly do I make a thing funny? And does it leave space for that like larger, broader conversation, the social commentary that sometimes comedians in the past are in the present too, because there are some really great social comics right now. They still exist. But whether or not they can go viral on an app like TikTok versus on a YouTube, yeah. And I think there's a hand in the back for somebody who wants to weigh in too. But other folks up here that wanted to talk about the same.
I was just gonna say, I dabble in stand-up and I have not posted much content because I'm like, my jokes take some time to get off the ground.
Yeah,
Like,
it's tough.
yeah.
So apologies for my interruption about George Carlin potentially going viral. And it's because George Carlin speaks to, funny enough, I don't know if he would have changed the trajectory of red pill or anti-intellectualism culture, but he speaks to this anti-establishment that I think people would have bought into and ate up the same way Paul Mooney did and the same way Richard Pryor did, if those voices were as loud, and they are just exceptionally funny. I think there's a possibility. Obviously, I can't guarantee that, but I do see some George Carlin clips resurfacing. But what my question is regarding, speaking on Drewski, because I think about him often too.
Stand with Drewski.
I'm actually dipping off into, I think it's I Show Speed, and can't think of the other guy.
Nice.
Axonite, and how their performance and what she just spoke to of this, let me get you real quick. And we saw this in the early days of Vine and in the early days of the Instagram Black comedians who came online. They would go for these low common denominator jokes that were often exploitative of Black cultural phenomenon and played on these tropes like, yes, you overstand it, but your audience doesn't. So how do we bring that education? Because I could spend an hour arguing with somebody who's 10 years my junior over how this is damaging and how you have to digest it differently than just consuming it as a joke. Like and I see that some of those content creators have switched. They have flipped into being more aware. They include more Black women when they're objectifying women. I don't know if that's better. They're more conscious of that because they are also trying to cross over into bigger audiences and realize that Black women are consuming their content and we're critical of that, and we lead in that kind of like we make things pop. But how do we start to have this conversation where people are having this social awareness if values in media and critical thinking in respect to media is not in the classroom anymore? How can we push that so that they know what they're consuming? While it may be cute and funny, but it's damaging because we don't have a Boondocks. We don't have a Dave Chappelle show who has this political commentary, but also makes you laugh.
I mean, and we can still kind of point even to Boondocks and Dave Chappelle. I feel like Dave Chappelle is a red-pilled person now. The Boondocks had a whole episode on R. Kelly, and it went right over their heads. You know what I'm saying? So like, there's this sense of
There's a
even
nostalgia
when
we
there
have.
is like, I think that it's similar. It's not algorithmic processing, but it's algorithmic thinking where we're thinking, because if we have that perspective on kind of an after effects where we think, okay, well, the Boondocks was progressive because we've canonized it as such.
Yeah.
Can we actually point the Boondocks to be like at a point of awakening for people like my age? No, I don't think so. I think that people think of it as just funny, right? But I think like something for like I Show Speed and Kai Cenat, I think like I Show Speed has like Speed himself has, I think when he went international was like a groundbreaking racialization moment for him. Like when he went overseas and was like, these people know who I am, like from afar. But then the first thing that comes to me and says the N-word, hard ER, right? Versus like he's like going to Chicago. He's like, oh, I'm having the best time of my life. You know, I think that someone like Kai Cenat, who's like is more situational, like he's in the house all day for a 27-hour stream, like, or like, you know, he has like the streamer university, which I thought was groundbreaking and actually kind of crazy. Who, you know, and this comes to, we haven't really talked about the diaspora wars, but like, I do believe that people react to them differently because of their ancestry. Like I Show Speed is African-American and Kai Cenat is a child of immigrants, right? And I think that like, and that comes out sometimes in their conversations and how people have critiqued them, right? Or how people have brought to Kai's face. Like they're like, bro, like you're saying this doesn't make any sense. Like you don't have this awareness, you don't have this history. And he's like, oh, versus I Show Speed already has that. Like he's already like, okay, I don't even want to be doing this because of X, Y, and Z. And in a sense, like we have a lot of children who are tuning into these streaming stories, so they want to be streamers. And like at the same time, you have like the government saying like you can't say critical race theory, like you can't say anything that like might help these people understand like the connection between what they're doing in blackface or minstrelsy, right? Where like they're putting on I Should Speed, they're putting on Kai Cenat, they're putting these people on, and at the same time, you have like the CEO of Twitch who's like doesn't list I Should Speed or Kai Cenat as their top in their Mount Rushmore of Twitch, which is a lot. Like everyone who's on Twitch knows that that's not the case. So there's a similar like devaluation, hyper-utilization, and then a normalization of like all these sorts of things happening at once that these two kids who like brains aren't even done cooking are at the helm of, you know what I mean? Like I feel bad for them. Like they're gonna get in 10 years and be like, what was that? You know what I mean? I really do believe that. So I think that there is a sense of like, there's a hope that we are going to create some new form of media or media consumption that's going to change people's minds politically, and it's not going to happen. So what are we going to do politically instead? It's kind of like what I feel like always comes like, maybe it'll never do that. Like if it's going to be in there, they've already thought about it and they're working to make sure it doesn't happen. To include, say, for example, TikTok actually did have revolutionary power and they bought it. You know what I mean? Like, so that doesn't have that impact anymore. So what are we going to do with each other actually in person? I think it's the kind of question that we kind of come to. Like, what are we going to do about that, as opposed to hoping that we can offset it to some other sort of structure.
Yeah, and I would echo that, because I definitely agree that whatever is going to happen has to happen in an online space, especially when we think about how media is like polysemic, right? Like you gave a great example from the Boondocks, R. Kelly episode, because I love that episode, but for different reasons from other people. Because like you said, like you can only like literacy looks like a lot of different ways, and to really read the humor and the critique in that cartoon, that specific episode, you have to have all this other knowledge that came before it to read it that way. Otherwise, you will read it just very straightforward. Ha ha, you know? So I think about that, especially in these moments where everybody's so tied to social media. They want to get all their education and information from there. And we know there's smart people online. You can, you know, click on a link, read an article, you can do this, but that's not what people are doing. People are watching YouTube videos of people who do not know what they're talking about, but yet they're making logical sense and they're just following that trail. And I'm like, we actually have to pull away from this a little bit. We have to pull back so that we can read social media, right? Like we had to learn how to read TV. We have to know how to read, you know, newspapers, and social media is no different. And in fact, it's more critical than the other previous forms, because this is the worst one. This is the one that is the hardest to read and the hardest to decipher, because it's just pushing, for the most part, not the whole part, but for the most part, pushing negativity and distorting ideologies, right? So we have to have something offline, something tangible. And it's really hard. I mean, as a college professor, I'm so tired of hearing, I mean, this is not, it's not a Michigan thing, you know, but I be hearing students talk about like they don't like to read. I'm like, who told you that? Because that's not even true. You probably just don't like to read whatever stupid thing we had to read in AP English in the 11th grade. Maybe you don't like English literature. I don't know. But to say that you don't like to learn, everybody likes to learn. Everybody likes to read. And also like that offline work, that political education, that literacy, developing that, it makes you enjoy media text better. You know what I mean? Like you can read one film 5 different ways. Like, I was just gonna say Scream, but I know that if my students are watching, they're gonna be like, why does this woman talk about Scream every day? But I'm like, we could talk about technology. Like I watch that movie and I think about the evolution of technology, okay? And that is not what that movie is about. But when you are, you know, developing yourself, developing your brain, you see different things. Also, it helps you be a little bit more immune to the nonsense, because you know, for a grifter to really take you into a harmful ideology, they have to seem like they know more than you. And like, it's really important in these times to know more than whoever we're watching. You know, I'm watching a lot of young women, you know, fall down the rabbit hole of the sprinkle lady. And it's hard for me as an older person to watch it, because I'm like, what is compelling? Nothing she's saying makes sense. But it makes sense to a lot of people who don't understand like what it means to actually aspire to a life like that and cede all your rights in those ways. And so like I can read it and I can see why it would be appealing, why I don't like what's wrong with it, what's good about it. But other people are just reading text as is. That's so dangerous. And we have to equip ourselves in these times.
There's a question. The questions up front.
We have 8 questions on Zoom. I'm gonna.
Oh, wow. Okay. We're going to be more economical with our words and our answers. Yes.
So our Zoom participant says, "Loving the convo, ladies. What do you think the what do you think the evolution of content consumption could look like if people are more strategic about what creators they support? And do you think the response from the industry and creators will just bastardize it the way that all previous creative strongholds have been?"
I mean, content can and has changed the world, you know? I mean, if most of us were mindful, if we had media literacy to begin with, right? Like you said, like there's things you need to know going into certain, you know, spaces to understand what you're consuming. But if, you know, more of us had that media literacy, you know, if we were intentional about, hey, I'm not going to engage with something that's designed to rile me up if there's nothing good to come of me getting riled up.
Yeah.
Right? Because some things we do need to debate about, some things we need to be passionate about and upset about. We don't necessarily need to have a passionate argument about going 50-50, right? Individual couples can make the decision that works for, you know, the best of them, and it's fine. Everyone else will be okay and completely unaffected by it. But you know, the algorithm's going to do what it does. The media company's going to do what they do. And I think that, you know, if there were a movement toward more thoughtful media, responsible media consumption, there would be a movement to, overwhelm us with content that wasn't thoughtful and to try to drag us back down.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the engagement with the politics of refusal that's long been a part of Black activist spaces, not just in social media, right? We have a long history of an intentional politics toward refusal. So when we say like refusal of technology, that has never meant that Black folks are disconnected from technology. Like we are not only consumers of technology, but vanguards in terms of our use of how we strategically pick up and put down various technological tools. And that's what I hear the description, right? It's like we can be more strategic about what we pick up and when we put things down. And we can be more vocal about when and why we're putting those things down. And that can have a serious impact on what kinds of content continue to make it not only to the top of the algorithm, right, but also whether or not these algorithms become the only determinants of what kind of content that we see. We have more power than we recognize, and we have more power collectively than we are demonstrating, I think, right now.
And if you're not rooted in that history, get rooted in it. Otherwise, that's how we get people talking about cancel culture and all these made up things, like literally co-opting the practice of canceling, which is related to boycotting. It's not what people have made it out to be. We know like digital dogpiling and harassing people online for no reason is bad. But this idea that we're going to divest our energy and our resources or refuse something because someone has been harmful after we've asked them not to be and they keep going for it is like, it's just so insane that we keep allowing people to capture our terms, capture our history, and then sell it back to us and pathologize it as if it's something else. Like I literally get so angry with my students about when people use cancel culture in those reductive ways. I typically assign that Meredith Clark piece on canceling. Shout out to Meredith Clark. We need to know where canceling comes from. Stop saying cancel culture. Stop debating whether it exists or not. At the end of the day, like it's a refusal praxis. It has a history and we need to tap into that because it's ours.
Question?
So we'll do one more Zoom and then head back to in person. So y'all were talking about how the same conversations come up time and time again on social media and people are recycling spicy topics instead of moving forward. How do we break out of this cycle? And this person says, I'm thinking about Dr. Umar and his whole interracial relationship stuff and the evolution of Malcolm X.
Wait, I couldn't hear the end. Dr. Umar and what?
The collective sigh.
We
didn't hear the end.
We heard Dr. Umar and started laughing.
I'm thinking about Dr. Umar and his whole interracial relationship stuff and the evolution of Malcolm X, is what this person says.
I mean, the only way forward is going backwards, I think. Part of like what I think about, like, I bring up like Vine's looping technology, like the loop, like the video ends and it keeps going back. As like not necessarily just like a fun business feature, but actually like kind of like an actual philosophy of time where you are literally in a loop, right? And so the only way to get out of the loop is go to another one, right? Or like go forth understanding like how to break in your mind the logics of time that continuity editing has been pushed on since the birth of the nation 19XY, you know? And I think that like in many ways, similar to what like, we're all talking about, is like the only way to change these conversations is to learn where they come from, because like I don't want to talk about going 50-50. I want that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about living in a commune. Like, you know, like there are many ways that things, that other conversations that always appear historically like lockstep with the things that pursue like advanced capitalism that we had to leave behind to advance capitalism. So why don't we go back and look at those things that were pushed away? Like you can read a book, a 700-page book called The Cultural Front that talks about the 1930s movement and how we could have had communism in America if the cars didn't become a company. If you read that book, like, you know, if you understand the revolutionary power of walking, if you understand the revolutionary power of accessibility into a space, like those are only ways that we can start to actually move forward is to pick up the things that we had to leave behind. So we have to go back in order to go forward. Like we don't have to be stuck into chronological time because time is not chronological. So I really believe, but like, you know, theoretical frame of mind. So I do believe that that's the only way for us to come forward. That was 2 minutes.
I think there's also strategy, like we can disentangle things like political media message strategies that we might need to deploy as a part of an action plan towards real policy change. And sometimes we have to engage in those kind of tactics as communication strategists to say, these are the short form ways of getting our messages across that work versus conversations, as you were saying, that require depth and nuance. So, I'm loath to talk a lot about Dr. Umar, but here we are. So if we're going to engage in complex conversation, there's a space for that. We have to actually create spaces, community spaces. And historically, the way that those kind of conversations work is that they're built on communal trust. I can have a conversation with you that's nuanced, where things about me get checked and things about you get checked if we have a relationship, if we've built that on trust. And if our platforms aren't allowing that, then we need to build that outside of those platforms so we can continue to have those conversations. But we might need to strategically deploy communication strategies that get us towards short-term policy goals using the affordances of the platforms as they currently exist. I hope we can start to see those as two beneficial aims that can exist side by side, right? And we have, as a community, long had the ability to do that, which means that we might do things strategically like voting or like aligning ourselves with candidates or strategies or policies that are not the end all be all salvation of a community, but that have a short-term goal and using specific communication strategies to rally support behind them, whilst at the same time having community conversations that are complex, that are nuanced, and that are built on care, community, love, and trust, right? But those two conversations sometimes happen at the kitchen table. Those conversations sometimes happen at the barbershop. Those conversations sometimes happen outside the purview of the dominant group and without that kind of capitalistic influence that can sometimes subvert what we're trying to accomplish. We can do two things at once. We can walk and chew gum, we kind of always have, and we can't allow this idea that everything has to happen visibly and be profitable to separate us from our long history of knowing how to do both of these things concurrently.
And I just like to plug one other doctor, Dr. Martin Luther King, because I would like to say, like, back when, he was organizing, this is at the beginning of the popularity of the television and also network broadcast news. And so news was very like localized. And so the local stations would chop up the videos of his speeches or his political conversations in different ways. And so he began to change how he wrote his speech, or whoever was writing his speeches, because I don't think he was writing them all. I'm just saying, like, they work with speechwriters. They worked as a team. I'm not saying he didn't write his stuff, but I'm saying, like, people, they would strategize how the speeches were written because they would be cut up for localized news. And so he had to make the speeches more punchy. So this idea that like things have been reduced to come across well to different audiences is not necessarily new, but the difference is that's Martin Luther King and organizers who are in the street doing work. Now we have social media, which has allowed someone who, I mean, I guess he's a doctor, get on Dr. Umar, is he says so. I don't know.
Well,
but this idea, like what he's pushing, anybody can be the person, whether they've had the boots on the ground, whether the school gets built or not. It's not getting built. I don't think it is. And I think that's the real difference in this moment, is about how we are in, like, who we're allowing to be platform, because they require attention to continue to exist. We're talking about them right now.
and all
And I
attention
think
is
we
good
need to-
attention within this economy.
all attention is good attention online. So it's also about us shifting who we're paying attention to, because there also are some other people who are educating and using social media in these ways that are really important. Throughout the years, I've learned so much from, I know you do long form, but like Jamila does things on social media. It's like, I learned things from that. What is the guy, Hassan Pipe? Don't bring him up. Okay. Just like different people that we're,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a larger conversation there. But that we could learn from, but it's about who we're giving our attention to. And I think a lot of times when someone doesn't agree with how we feel and we don't like what they're saying, we still give them that attention. We still share the video. We're still angry and repost it. And that's fueling the virality as well. So we have to think about how we are playing a part in that as well. That's what I was really getting at. I hope I didn't say anything else.
No, I think we have time for one more. Is that right?
One
y'all?
more question.
More question in the room? We'll be around after. Sorry, I think they got.
Hi. Okay, so I hope this question makes sense. But basically, I'm asking, do you think there's a difference between someone falling down a traditional conservative pipeline versus a more alt-right pipeline? For example, like Candace Owens versus Doja Cat, you know?
Same pipeline.
Absolutely same timeline. Doja Cat was interracial on
Showing feet.
Showing feet.
But I mean, and for real, like that's actually, she was in the spaces that Candace Owens is listening to in,
Yeah.
right? And so in one regard, we have someone like Doja Cat who has like the literal, legible sexual body that these spaces still want, which is like a kind of like, sorry, I hope this doesn't sound very Dr. Umar, but like it's like this evidence of interracial, like
Yeah,
this
racial ambiguity.
this racial ambiguity that like has this kind of like, still, even though like interraciality is like really common, it still has a sexual residue on it from the history of slavery, and that she's not American. Like her blackness comes from someone who's South African, which also has a different history in their racial categorization scheme, right? So I think that like she's in the same pipeline, and you see it in the way that she wears her evidence of being online, right? Her song "Move" put on the evidence. That's kink play. Like for a certain group of people online, and like similarly, like Candace, we don't need to talk about Candace, like that's very like clear rock. But I think that like the red pill, the alt-right, make America healthy again, Trad Wives, they're the same pipeline. They're and that's important to know. Like the crunchy granola moms who are anti-vax, that's the pipeline. Into the same pipeline as that leads to like a Charlie. Sorry, I mean, sorry, my first time saying it publicly, like ever. So that actually didn't say that at all. Oh yeah, but we're talking about Doja Cat. Okay, so Doja Cat like has like this evidence, like where she wore, I think, a shirt of Sam Hyde, who was like all right, like a very dangerous man, right? So I think that they're the same. I think that the difference is in this, her sexuality is what makes it. Like the music itself isn't a pipeline. Like I don't listen to Streets and think that that has anything to do with the alt-right.
Right.
But everything else about her public persona, up to and including how she talks about how people shouldn't talk about her, or the way she's kind of confrontational, the jokes that she makes, it belongs to this 4chan kind of comedic genealogy.
I think.
Okay.
I was just going to add that, like, the traditional conservative pipeline that you mentioned doesn't really exist anymore. You know, like that person would probably become a liberal.
Right.
Based, yeah. You know, they'd be a Democrat. Have moved. You know, the goalposts have moved. But Doja's so interesting because, like, she's managed to very publicly have this alt-right experience and life, and like a whole legion of fans that is like completely disconnected from that, to the point where they don't even know to get offended because they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? It's just so, you know, beyond what most of us think about when we think of the internet, and just beyond the sort of spaces that we've been in. So I don't know. I think that is something very unique, and something that a woman racialized as biracial probably is the only person who could get away with doing something like that.
So now to my Jake.
Like,
Yes.
He's also leading people.
That's so
down the
good.
alt-right.
Yep.
somebody has to write that. We had a conversation earlier today about, you know, intentions, when we were kind of talking about, like, is it our task to kind of figure out why people are doing the things that they're doing in these spaces, or is it our task? And, you know, I can only speak myself. Is it our task to figure out like what the implications of those things are? And so I'm really appreciative for this panel, for us helping us think through whether or not, we don't know what's going on in Doja Cat's brain or Drake's. And honestly, thankfully, like, I don't want to swim in their brains, but I think it is incumbent upon us who consume their art or their content to really think about what the implications of those things are, right? As consumers of content, as some of you are maybe content creators yourself, to think about what kind of power is inside of what you put out, and what kind of power we wield in terms of what we consume, and ourselves as the data that these systems consume in order to feed more content to more people. So I'm really grateful for y'all coming and listening to us. I want to give our panel a big round of applause, and thank you all for participating. Amazing conversation today. I was told to remember to put up the QR code. I am remembering to put up the QR code. So we would like your feedback. The Disco Network would like your feedback on events like this, letting us know how we can bring more talks like this, more folks like this to campus, and to think about these kinds of ideas together. So I'm giving everyone, I was told to pause, make sure everybody gets the QR code. This is me pausing. But also stay in touch with the Disco Network by following us on social media. You can follow the Disco Network at the Disco Network on most platforms and sites. And thank you again to everyone who came out. Thank you to our support staff in the back. We give a big round of applause to the IT folks, the digital studies folks, the folks from Disco Network that made this event possible. And thank you to you all. Have a great rest of your night. Spend more time talking about it. That's right.
I'm a master student in the school. Okay, so I won't be in the whole story. This year, actually,
I really appreciate it.
Whatever that's for.
Yeah.
Yeah.